Okay, so good evening, everyone. Good evening, IFNG. Good evening, IDP Philippines. So for tonight, we are now on our final leg for our IDP series lecture. So again, let's welcome Miss Kathleen Jean de Ungria from IDP Philippines. Hello, Miss
Hi,
Boy!
Kathleen.
hi, Miss Gladys. Thank you. Thank
Hi.
you. Thank you for inviting me again.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope everybody's doing great. Okay, so and I'm not sure where you are at the moment, but good evening. Or I'm not sure. Are there people here from other parts of the world? So maybe I should also say good morning or good afternoon. But anyway, like what Miss Gladys said, my name is Kathleen. You can call me Kath. I prefer to be called that way because I think Kathleen is very formal. So I'm from IDP. So I'll be sharing with you some of the tips and strategies and how to ace your IELTS test, especially with IDP. So I'm not sure if you've taken the exam before, but anyway, this applies to everybody. So let's start. So one of the macro skills that you have to take for the in that test would be listening. So what are you going to expect, or what are you supposed to do with the listening test? Well, in the listening test, what is important is that you listen. Well, what are you supposed to listen for? One, you have to listen for specific information. So when we say specific information, we're talking about details, dates, names, and even instructions. And also you have to listen for a gist or maybe the overall meaning. And also you have to recognize what we call communicative function or the roles of the people who are having the conversation. You also have to determine the attitude of the speaker and even their mood. So you will be able to guess. Okay. And then you also need to anticipate what is coming in terms of language and content. Also, with the listening test, you have to listen for inferences or even deductions, like include unknown words, because even unknown words can help you, okay, answer some of the questions. By the way, during the listening test, you have to ignore what you don't need. Okay, so how would you know what you won't be needing? You have to first and foremost, you have to read the questions first so you know what to listen for, because that's a problem with most test takers, not just for IELTS. Even my students in the university, when we would have, let's say, a listening activity, they would listen, but they do not know exactly what they're supposed to listen for. So they end up not getting the grade that they want. All right. So, anyway, so the first tip for the listening test is you need to use your time to read the questions and see the topics. This is very important. I repeat, if you just keep on listening during the entire exam and you do not know exactly what to listen for, then you're just wasting your time. And if you're wasting your time, that is a costly mistake. So in IELTS, we call it a costly mistake because you won't be able to answer all the questions. And what happens then is that you won't be getting your desired score. So it's very important that you use your time to read the questions and then you see the topics. All right. Um, Excuse me. Before I continue, can I ask some of you to please put your microphones on mute? Because I can hear a lot of background noises. Okay, thank you. Okay. Next, underline keywords to help you focus on the questions. This is very important. Okay. If you're taking the paper-based test, you're allowed to underline, or if you want, encircle certain keywords to help you focus. With IELTS, CD IELTS, I believe you can highlight the words. Okay. Next, you can think of synonyms to help you predict the likely content. So remember, synonyms, they help you in listening and reading. But I would like to remind you that synonyms can be dangerous in um, writing, and speaking. I'll explain that later. Okay. Next, questions follow the recording order, so you just have to keep on going. You don't have to jump from one question to the next. Okay. And then stick to the word limit. Don't copy across extra words. So this is another costly mistake because what people do is that they add certain words, they add the article, they add the function grammar, which sometimes it's not needed. So if the instruction says one word or a number, then you only need to provide one word. I received a question before, but what if it's a credit card number? Then you have to write the entire card number. I believe there are 16 digits. So you have to write all 16 digits, and that's considered as one number. Okay. And then intonation helps. So from the intonation alone, you would be able to guess the mood, the attitude of the speaker. Okay. Before I go to, sorry. Okay. So another tip for listening test. Um, let's just say that when you do practice test, okay, train yourselves to listen to the audio file only once because in the actual test, you only have one chance to listen. So if you keep on listening over and over again, trying to answer the questions, sorry, but that's not how it goes in the actual test. So train yourselves to listen only once, okay? And you have to get used to it. Another, try to practice listening to different situations like lectures, podcasts, etc. Why? That way you get used to the different accents. Okay. Um, because I got a feedback before, uh, ma'am, how come I don't understand it? I said, why can't you understand it? And then she said that because the listening file that was used in the practice test, the accent was so thick. Okay, so you have to get used to that. Remember, there are different kinds of English accents. We have the Queen's English, we have American accent, we have Australian accent, and under the Australian accent, there are other 27 accents. So you really have to get used to the different accents. Okay. Now let's go to reading. I'm not sure if you like reading, but most people they dread the reading test. Um, One of the reasons why, well, it's not really dreadful. It's just that because when you are taking the reading test, it's a time pressured exam. And imagine you have to read about 2,200 to 2,750 words, right? So what are you going to do then? And you only have a few minutes, right? An hour. So it's very important that you read the questions first and then you skim the text. Okay. Again, for both listening and reading, you have to read the questions first so you know what to look for. The problem with some candidates, not just candidates, test takers in general, even in the test takers in my university, what they do is they read the entire text first. So they're wasting precious time again. So if you're wasting precious time, it means you that's a costly mistake. Okay. It also means that because you wasted time, you won't be able to get the desired band score. I'm not trying to scare you, but that's the truth. So remember, the reading test lasts for 60 minutes. Okay, there are about 40 questions based on three passages, and each passage may be about 900 words long. Okay, so maybe a total of 2,200, 2,750 words. Okay, and then all the materials used in the text or in the test were originally designed for a non specialist audience, so you don't really have to worry about coming across big words. Okay, um, especially some people are worried what if I get, let's say, questions about science? You're not being tested for your knowledge of science. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. Um, Next would be you underline keywords. There would be tons, lots of unfamiliar words. So you really need to underline keywords that will help you focus. Okay, so do you deal with a lot of words, with the amount of words? Okay, you start first by building your vocabulary. You can only do that if you get to the habit of reading. Okay, when I say reading, I'm not talking about Facebook reading. I'm talking about serious English language materials such as newspapers, broadsheets, um, credible articles. So that way you get familiar with sentence structures. That's very important. That will also help for your writing. And also, when you get to the habit of reading, you're able to build up your word bank, okay? And you're able to mine vocabulary. Another is that you have to note the number of words allowed in your answer. So again, instructions. So that is one of the skill that is being tested in the IELTS test, your ability to follow instructions. So again, note the number of words allowed in your answer. So if the instruction says no more than 2 words, then it can only be 2 words, not 3. Okay. So always follow directions. Next, don't worry about words you don't know. Unusual words will be explained within the text. So if the word is not explained, it means it's not important. So if let's say you come across some jargons or technical words, you are not going to be asked to define them. So it's not really a problem. So just skip it. All right. But if you think those unfamiliar words will help you find the answer, then try to do context cluing. That's a reading strategy. All right. So you also have to remember in the IELTS reading test, you have to look for distractors, okay, and synonyms. Next, don't waste time on any one question you're having trouble with. So let's say, for example, you don't have the answer yet to question 3, then you can jump to question 4. But make sure that before you submit your answers, make sure that you were able to answer all of the questions. Don't leave anything blank. Okay. And then 1 mark for each right answer, no penalty for wrong answers. Now, another tip for the reading test that is not included here, you have to become familiar with the different task types. That way, you know how to approach them. And if you come across these task types, it won't be a surprise anymore. But what's important with the reading test is that you know to skim, you know how to skim, you know how to scan, and you need to know how to read for details. Okay, that's very important for the reading test. By the way, if you have questions, just jot them down, and I'm going to try to answer them all of the questions later. All right, so let's talk about writing. I think writing is one of the most, let's just say, challenging. I wouldn't say difficult. It becomes challenging because probably one, it's time pressured again. Second, um, you do not know how to approach the task. Okay. Remember, there are 2 task types in writing. We have task 1 and task 2. In the writing task, you're only given about 20 minutes or 20 minutes, and you have to write in formal style, and you have to provide your reader or the one who's going to check your paper 150 words. Do they count? Yes, they do. But what if, let's say, you only wrote 140 words? Then your grade will be affected, especially with fluency. Sorry, because I've been talking the whole day. Sorry. All right, going back in task 1 academic, you'll be asked to describe some information based on the graph, the table, the chart, and the diagram, and you need to present a summary. And with task 1 general training, you have to write a letter. So these are the different tasks that you have to do for task 1. And for task 2, you have to write an opinion essay. You have to write what we call a descriptive essay sometimes. So you really have to make sure that you are able to provide your checker or your examiner at least 250 words. Okay. By the way, also with writing task two, we call it discursive essays. Okay, so in discursive essays, you'll have to present a solution to a problem. You also have to present or justify an opinion, also compare and contrast evidence. So how were you scored? Well, definitely the in the writing task, you'll be graded 25% or a quarter for your task achievement and task response. This is all about satisfying the requirements of the task. When I say satisfying the requirements of the task, is that you are making sure that you write at least 150 words, 250 words, that you're able to present a clear overview for task one academic, that you're able to provide exactly selected trends. Okay, because what happens usually with academic task one is that people usually just tell a story, or sometimes they add ideas of their own, like emotions, which should not be. Because if you add something that is irrelevant in task one academic, even in task one general training, then your score for LR or lexical resource will be affected. Okay. So again, let's go back to task achievement and task response. So with task achievement, that's task one. You'll be assessed on how well you satisfy the requirements of the task. This is something that this is what your examiners are always checking, whether you were able to satisfy the requirements of the task. So what do I mean by that? You have to provide the key information for task one academic. You have to make sure that you provide what we call noticeable features. So I'm talking about numerical data. We're talking about percentages. Okay. You have to talk about the highest, the lowest, the overall trends for task one achievement. Um, I think most candidates, they're trying to aim for band seven. So how do you get a band seven? Well, definitely that is about, again, satisfying the requirements of the task. But a band six can also, let's just say, satisfy the requirements. It's just that maybe the overview that you presented in your essay was not clear. What is an overview? An overview is the most important feature of your task one academic essay. So it's the overall message put in a nutshell. It's the executive summary. Usually it can be found, let's say it can be the last sentence of the first paragraph or the second sentence of the first paragraph, or it can be the last paragraph. Okay. So how do you write a clear overview? You have to select at least three or four most significant things and write them in general terms. When I say general terms, do not include data, because if you add numerical data, then there's nothing else for you to write in the body of the essay. All right. So remember, with task one or in any type of writing, whether it's for task one or task two, it's always about adequacy, okay, relevance, appropriacy, and accuracy. Okay, those four things. Um, with task achievement, task one general training, how do you satisfy the requirements of the task? Well, usually they would ask you to write for a specific person. So here it should be about specificity or audience awareness, meaning to say that you adapt the style of your writing based on who's going to read it. So usually it's mentioned there, if it's for a manager, then it has to be formal style or semi-formal. So that is where adequacy and appropriacy would come in. So the tone of your message, that's very important. Another thing, there will always be three bullet points in the prompt. So in the prompt, you have to be careful. Sometimes there are words there that are in plural form, like they would be asking you for suggestions, changes. Now, for you to be able to fully satisfy the requirements of the task, you have to provide two or three suggestions or changes. If you only provided your reader one suggestion or one change that you totally ignore the plural form, then you are not fully satisfying the requirements of the task. Now, if let's say you did not have the salutation and the complimentary closing, then that's not the letter anymore. Then you are, again, you're not satisfying the requirements of the task. Okay. So remember that in task one, general training, you have to remember that you look at the three bullet points. You have to observe audience awareness. Okay. Because if, let's say, you're supposed to write for a manager, but your letter, it sounds too friendly, then definitely your grade will be affected as well. Now, for task two, that is what we call task response. So, again, this is a discursive essay. So, you have to provide supporting evidence, okay, provide discussion on the topic. All right. So, how do you fully satisfy the requirements of the task? The moment you see the prompt, you have to identify already how many parts do I need to discuss. The problem sometimes with some candidates or any test taker, what they do is that they answer only one question, but actually they have to answer two or sometimes three questions. Okay, because probably they read only one part of the prompt. Okay, so how come I'm always getting, let's say, a band five? You get a band five because you address it only partially, meaning to say you only answered one question. Okay. How come I got a band six? Probably, yes, you discussed all the parts. It's just that the opinion you provided is unclear. Okay. Or maybe you became a fence sitter. A fence sitter is someone who would let the reader decide which side to take. Now, if you cannot decide whether you agree or disagree, then you have to discuss both in your essay, especially in the concluding part. You have to discuss there, oh, I agree in this situation, or I agree with this topic, but in this situation. However, I also disagree with the topic because of this and that, right? So you can end your, let's say, your essay by saying, um, there's really no clear opinion, or I do not have a clear opinion about this, for example, because it would always depend on the situation. So if you cannot really take sides, then you really have to explain that in your conclusion part. Okay, so um, for task response, again, analyze the question, you plan, you organize your ideas. You have to make sure that you meet the number of words required, which is 250 words. You include all the key parts of the task. You develop ideas by providing relevant information, supporting evidence. Can you use your own life experience? Yes. Remember, as long as it's relevant to the topic. The problem with most people is that, yes, oh, I think my experience, I can apply it in this topic, but actually not. So you have to be very careful. And I noticed that sometimes people, because in my class, sometimes they would have to write an argumentative paper. What I notice is that sometimes instead of arguing, what they do is that they simply tell a story. Okay, you're supposed to provide contrasting ideas if you are trying to prove, let's say, an opinion. Okay. It's also important in task two or in task response, for task response, is that you focus on the ideas that you want to most say the most and fully develop them. Um, Again, you get a band five. Okay, a band five is something that you wouldn't want to get. A band five, you're presenting some main ideas, but very limited and not sufficiently developed. So maybe sometimes the details that you included are irrelevant. A band seven, okay, a band seven, you're presenting, you're extending your ideas with supporting details. Maybe sometimes there's a tendency for you to overgeneralize or maybe lack focus. A band eight and a band nine. It means it's very clear your examiner or the one who will be grading your paper will no longer be or will not be confused. Okay. You have to be what we call a graceful writer. A graceful writer is that you're able to write um, without confusing your reader. Okay. And then coherence and cohesion is all about how clearly you organize your ideas. So here you have to make use of transitional devices. Now you have to be careful with transitional devices. Why? Because if you keep on using the same transitional devices, the highest score you can get is a 6. Okay. Especially if, let's say, for example, the transitional device that you're using is something that is very mechanical. What do I mean by that? You keep on using first, second, third, fourth, fifth. What if you have 10 ideas? Then that would be 10th, right? So that's a problem. If it's too mechanical, the highest score you can get for coherence and cohesion would be 5. Even if, if let's say you did not show your examiner or your reader your ability to write paragraphs, that's a problem too. Um, Even in task one, there are paragraphs. Let's say for task one academic, probably about 3 paragraphs, not more than that. For letter writing, there are paragraphs as well. For for task two, definitely you need to have at least 4 or 5 paragraphs to meet the 250 words, right? So it's very important that you have introduction, you have body, and conclusion. Okay. Um, Make sure that you provide your examiner or your reader the answer that is logically structured. Okay. And also make sure that the different parts, the paragraphs fit together. That's coherence and cohesion. Another one is lexical resource. So this is all about how good your vocabulary is. Um, a lot of people they think that if they use big words, they will get the highest score. That's not true. You have to know how to choose the right language for the task. Okay, you have to make sure that you use the right words. Um, a while ago, I mentioned that you have to be careful with synonyms because sometimes, even if the words are synonymous to each other, the use of the words they vary. Okay. I notice with my students, for example, because most of my students are engineers, engineers to be, so they love to use the word prevalent. Um, Prevalent means widespread, right? So, but they also want like to use prevalent with, let's say, technology. Some, yes, it can be used, technology so prevalent, but there's a better word for that. Because if, let's say, you use, and another one that is commonly used by my students, technology is so rampant, prevalent and rampant are words that are synonymous to each other, but rampant has a negative connotation. So if you would say technology is rampant, but in your mind it means technology is prevalent, then you're giving your reader the wrong message. So you really have to be very careful. You have to make sure that you're able to write a wide range of vocabulary, okay, that is very natural and sophisticated. Okay, the problem with some people is that they use big words, highfalutin words, because they think that it would help them get a good score. Sometimes it does. It does if you know how to use them properly in a sentence. But if you keep on using the same words over and over again, there's no variation, it was used in the wrong context, then probably the highest score you would get is a 6 for lexical resource because you will be considered as a risk taker. Okay. You don't want to be a risk taker. You want to be graded as someone who can use words naturally and with sophistication. Okay. Can you use idioms? Uh, it's okay, but idioms are informal language or idioms, they're considered as informal language. And this is academic writing. So this is formal language. You may use them, but not too many. Okay. You have to remember that there are 4 things that you have to remember for writing. You have to get the task done. You have to stick to the data. You have to plan and write coherently in the time given, and you only have 60 minutes for two tasks. And you have the right vocabulary to match the task. Another is that you have to have what we call grammar and syntax, okay, produced in a coherent manner. So, what if you keep on using simple structures? That's fine. But if it's a succession of simple structures, the highest score probably that you can get for GRA would be a 6, because you need to show your reader that you know how to use, or you also need to know that you also know how to use complex structures. You know how to write compound structured sentences. Okay. So again, GRA is not just about having the ability to stitch ideas together to one sentence. GRA, or grammatical range and accuracy, is about displaying your grand ideas with a variety of sentence types with your writing skills. Okay. If you show your reader that you have what we call a grammatical range, or you use different structure types, then the chances of you getting a high score or a high band score is very high. Okay. So it's very important that when let's say you're already sitting during the exam, and then they handed you the prompt, or the prompt is already flashed in front of you, you know how to approach the task. Okay. So tips for writing tests: allocate your time properly. Task 2 is worth twice as much as task 1. So many people would ask me, should I work on task 2 first because I have to write 250 words? It's up to you. Okay. Um, I cannot say that task 1 is easier. I cannot say that task 2 is easier. It depends. Okay. It depends on you because you're the one taking the exam. But I would suggest, like, if I were the one sitting for during the exam, I would write the task 2 first. Okay, but I have to make sure that I only allot 40 minutes, maybe spend about 2 minutes to read the prompt and circle every single word, then maybe try to write or come up with a skeleton outline of it, then work on it. Okay. And then decide on your position, express your view clearly, and provide support. When we say support, we're talking about examples and evidence. Now, um, this is very important. Let's say, for example, with one idea, you need to have a topic sentence, and for you to um, express yourselves clearly, your views clearly, for each topic sentence, there should be at least 2 or 3 supporting details. All right, then a concluding sentence. That's a very good or in a well organized paragraph. Also, you have to make sure that the last paragraph is your conclusion, right? You have to make sure that you state your opinion, because if you don't state your opinion, then the highest score you can get is only 5, meaning you're not satisfying the requirements of the task. Another one is you organize your ideas into paragraphs, each with a clear focus. All right. So again, you have to be a graceful writer. You can only organize your ideas into paragraphs if you know how to use transitional devices or cohesive devices, but you also need to show a variety. Okay. Next, use a range of vocabulary, grammatical structures. They say that once a person already reaches the age of, let's say, collegiate level, your vocabulary should be, let's say, 10 to 20,000 words. So try to show that. Show that to your reader or to your examiner that you have a good range, okay? That you're not using the same words over and over again. Another is that you analyze the task and write relevant content. This is very important. Remember, relevance, appropriacy, and accuracy, they're very important in writing. Otherwise, the highest score you can get, I'm not trying to scare you, but that's the truth. The highest score you can get would be a 5 because you were not able to provide details that are relevant to the task. Okay. And then use a variety of linking words to connect and sequence your ideas. So this is very important. Do not provide your reader simple structures. You need a variety of linking words to stitch your ideas together. Okay. And then do not write in note form. Use headings even in the letter writing for task one general training. If they ask you to provide, let's say, suggestions, do not write them in bullet forms. Otherwise, that's not a letter. Okay. The same thing with the essay. If they're asking you to provide with the advantages and you would like to provide three advantages, and then you decided to put bullet points in your essay, then the highest score you can get for, let's say, coherence and cohesion is a 5 because it's not a paragraph, it's not an essay. Okay. And then check your work carefully. Know your usual mistakes, or if your usual mistakes are subject verb agreement, or let's say spelling. If you still have time, then always check, okay, before you submit your output. All right. Now let's talk about speaking. I'd like to dispel some of the myths in speaking. Um, because I got a question before, even in my class, because we have speech classes, and then they sometimes they ask me, "Ma'am, do I need to have an American accent? Do I need to sound like the Queen?" No, that's not true. That's false. Why? Because your examiners are trained uh, to listen to different accents, so they have what they call the international ear. Also, worldwide, what we call world Englishes. Okay, world Englishes is already accepted. So even if you have a very strong Filipino accent, you can still get a 7 or an 8 as long as you have the right peaks and valleys. As long as you're singing and you don't sound dead, you can still get a good score for speaking. All right. So let's talk about speaking. So in the speaking test, you have to sit down in front of your examiner, or let's say, I believe now they're doing a virtual speaking exam. So you can be face to face with your examiner or see them through a screen. So you have to spend about 11 to 15 minutes. Okay, so the first part one, 4 to 5 minutes, you'll be asked questions about information about yourself, maybe an opinion about something. All right. Common experiences and situations. Maybe they would ask you about where you live, what you think of your hometown, or maybe they would ask you about um, pictures or even the weather. So usual uh, small talk topics. Okay, because they're trying to check whether you have the ability to communicate. Okay. Another in part two, that's the 3 to 4 minutes. This is the individual long term. So you will be given a minute to think about what you're going to say, and then they will give you about the topic. And then you will be given another 2 minutes to share something about the topic. You have to make sure that you write certain keywords during the 1 minute so you won't get lost, or um, you won't totally black out during this speaking test. So it's all about um, you trying to draw out ideas from your own experience. Okay, and then in part three, that's 4 to 5 minutes. This is the discussion part. So remember, in part three, it's not about you, so you have to provide a general answer. The problem with some people is that they keep on talking about themselves. So if you do that, then your examiner won't be able to give you a good score. So they will try to lead you back to talking about something in general. But if you keep on talking about personal ideas, then the highest score probably you can get for fluency and coherence is a 6. Okay, because again, you are not following instructions. You also have to remember in the speaking test that your examiners assess your speaking ability by matching your performance to the band descriptors. Okay, so each criterion counts 25% or a quarter of your speaking mark. So let's start with the first one. This is FC, or fluency and coherence. So fluency and coherence is all about whether a person can speak without repeating or correcting oneself. If the candidate can actually develop the topic without hesitation, okay, um, whether you're giving your examiner, let's say, a well organized answer, and then there's no reason for your examiner to clarify your answer. Also, with FC, you're being tested whether you're able to use connecting words or what we call discourse markers correctly and flexibly. Okay. Um, Fluency means you're able to talk smoothly without much hesitation, while coherence means making it easy for your listener to follow and understand what you're saying. That's fluency and coherence. How do you get a 9? Okay, 9 is the dream band score or in the desired band score of many. How do you get a 9? A 9 for fluency, one should be able to speak fluently rather. One should be able to speak fluently without repetition. And if there are repetitions, very rare. Okay. Fully developed topic, fully and appropriately developed topic, appropriately spoken topic, and speaks coherently. While a 6, well, how come I always get a 6, for example? A 6 is awarded if, let's say, you're showing willingness to talk or to speak at length. But probably there are times when your answer is not relevant to the topic. Let's say you lost coherence, okay, and then there's a hesitation, then you get a 6. While lexical resource, again, it's talking about vocabulary. So the same thing with writing, you have to show your examiner that you have a wide range. There should be a variety of words, okay? And not just a variety, there should be adequate, sufficient vocabulary, okay? And try not to use try not to use common words, okay? Your examiners also check for collocations, okay? And your ability to uh, get around the vocabulary gap, that's a skill in speaking. Uh, you are able to get around a vocabulary gap by providing the right vocabulary word or the right word without noticeable hesitation. Okay, meaning to say that you're able to speak. If let's say you're pausing, your pauses are not noticeable. Your pauses doesn't mean or does not signal that you don't know what to say. Okay. Next would be GRA or grammatical range and accuracy. This is about whether you're able to provide sentence free, sentences that are error free. Okay, the percentage. Do your examiners count your grammar lapses? They don't count. The only reason why you get a low score for grammar is because the lapses already impede communication. And maybe you're providing your examiner also simple structures. So again, there should be a variety. The range and complexity of your grammar, that is being checked. Okay. And the last part would be pronunciation. So that's another 25%. So here, um, sometimes a candidate's native language affect their sound production. That happens. Uh, we're Filipinos. English is not our first language. So sometimes when you pronounce certain words, it doesn't sound like a native speaker, but that's okay. As long as it's clear, it's intelligible, then you can still get a high score, right? So you use pronunciation to convey and enhance meaning. You don't use pronunciation to sound, let's just say, social. No, that's not how it is. Okay. Your examiners are checking whether, up to what extent your accent can cause strain for the listener. Okay. Again, I repeat, your examiners are trained to have an international ear. And for you to achieve, let's say, a high mark for pronunciation, you should show your examiner that there are certain pronunciation features When I say pronunciation features, we're talking about rhythm, we're talking about stress, we're talking about intonation. You don't sound dead, okay? You also talk at an appropriate speed. The tendency with most people when they're very nervous, they talk very fast. So what happens? It sounds, let's just say, choppy, okay? And sometimes you are not able to pronounce words clearly, especially individual sounds. So that's very important in speaking. So tips for the speaking test: listen, read, and think in English. You have to train yourselves to think in English. Okay, that's very important because if you directly translate from Filipino to English during your speaking test, you're wasting time. And usually you don't really have the exact words. Okay, so do not translate. That's a big mistake. We in language learning we call it code switching. Do not switch from one language to another. I think that happens too. For example, when I'm grading my students in class for their speech, sometimes they tend to use Filipinisms. They use words and expressions in Filipino. For example, if they made a mistake, they would use expressions like "I," right? "I," or "naku," uh, and "tsaka." So these words sometimes they come out, but yeah. So as much as possible, do not translate from Filipino to English. Next, talk to at a steady rate, not too fast or too slow. Even if you speak very fast, it's not going to, your speaking test will not end sooner. Okay. And then use a preparation minute to make notes. This is very important. You list down all the keywords to help you remember what to say. Next, use natural fillers like now, let me think, to avoid pauses. All right. So, how do you say? But it's also very important that you limit the fillers because fillers can also be an indication that there's hesitation, that you do not know what to say. All right. Next would be don't sound flat. Use stress and intonation. What can you do about your intonation? Let's say, for example, if you're watching English movies, try to imitate how the actors deliver their lines. That would help. Okay. And then don't worry about a grammar mistake and move on. Um, there was one question before, a long time ago, when we would conduct master classes or face to face. What they would do is they would ask, "Mom, what if I talk with my hands, like you use gesticulations?" That's fine. You won't be getting a bad score because you keep on using your arms, your hands. It becomes a problem when you're just doing this without saying anything. All right. Another, give more details about each of the points you make. So if they ask you about a certain topic, try to provide an explanation as to why. So justify it, because if you simply answer them with one word, then you won't be getting a good score, both for FC and lexical resource. You have to remember that your fluency and coherence and your lexical resource, they're connected. So if you did not understand the question correctly, then your vocabulary is also affected. So if you don't understand a question, you can ask the examiner to clarify or simplify a certain word, but don't do that often. Maybe once or twice, that's fine. Because if you keep on asking your examiner to clarify certain questions, they will just move on to the next. Okay. So again, when they ask you a question, explain your answers by giving reasons for what you say. Don't just say, "oh, yes," or "no." Okay. Next, part three, weigh up both sides of the question and give examples to support them. Remember, part three is you have to discuss topics in general. It's not about you. Okay. So provide your examiner examples again. That way, they would know that you are able to fully develop the topic. Rehearse, work, and study. Rehearse, work, study, and where you live questions, but sound natural. Sorry. Your examiner would know if you're speaking from memory. Your examiner would know if you're providing them canned answer. When we say canned answers, these are prepared answers. How would your examiner know, or how do they know? They know. They know because your intonation is different. They know because you're just speaking and speaking and speaking, talking and talking and talking without pausing, without even breathing. Or sometimes they ask you about a certain topic, maybe it's somehow it's linked to that topic, but your answer is different. What do I mean by that? Um, for example, they ask you something about technology, but you fail to hear the word home technology. So instead of talking about home technology, you talked about something else, a different type of technology. Probably you ended up talking about the internet, or ended up talking about mobile phones when you could have talked about, let's say, home appliances. Okay. So these kinds of things. Give your opinion with, like, in my view, as far as I'm concerned, generally speaking, I'd say you don't have to sound like you don't have to sound like a lawyer. Okay, because there are some I've heard some people when they're trying to explain something, they would say, "Oh, I object to that," with conviction. It's like they are in the court. So um, you have to use different ways of expressing your ideas and opinions. Okay. Another would be practice typical IELTS topics: education, health, fitness, travel, transport, leisure, and communication. Why? Because they always come up. Okay. So that when you are, let's say, asked about a certain topic, you have a lot of ideas. Okay. Um, Sometimes they ask you about famous people, sometimes they ask you about um, tall buildings. Sometimes they ask you about genes, right? So certain topics. All right, so we're almost at the end, so please bear with me. So strategy summary. So make the opportunity to use English. So if you can use English when you're at work, or let's say when you're talking with a friend, that way you're able to practice. It's very important also that you have a speaking buddy. That way you can exchange ideas using English. Sometimes people would say, "Oh, I don't feel comfortable speaking with a friend in English because it's awkward." You have to. Okay, try to speak in English most of the time. So even if you're ordering something from Jollibee or from McDonald's, then try to use English, right? And then set targets for your preparation. Um, this is not something that you take um, say every month. Don't take the test as if it's a practice test. So if you can prepare for 6 months to a year, that would be great. All right. Or maybe 3 months. Now choose academic or general training. It's not IDP who will decide for you. All right. So you have to check with your visa officer, or from the institution, which one you should be taking, whether it's academic or general training. And you know how you'll be scored. So if you have the band descriptors for writing and speaking, I believe you can find them also in the website of IDP, the public version. Then you can use that while you're preparing, so you know exactly what your examiners are looking for and how you're being graded. And then IELTS preparation courses focus more on test taking rather than language skills. So there are two skills. You need to have language skills. That's true. But it's also very important that you have the test taking skills, meaning to say, you know how to follow directions, you know how to, let's say, manage your time, this sort of thing. All right. So every day counts towards language skills. So an IELTS 7 or higher represents thousands of hours of learning and using English. English is not something you learn overnight. Okay, so you really need to practice. You really need to make sure that you expose yourself to the language. So if you have friends, talk to them in English. Um, Read something. That's very important. We were discussing earlier with Miss Gladys that most of my students they don't read anymore. That's why when you ask them certain things, they can answer only. Yes, they can answer, but they cannot expound their answers. All right. So maybe I'll use myself as an example. Um, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in fine arts, believe it or not, but I ended up teaching English. How did that happen? Everything happened by accident. Okay, so after graduation, I tried to look for a job, but I ended up teaching art. So, well, that's still related to my course. It's just that many people are wondering how come I ended up teaching English. I was told with one of my mentors in teaching, or sorry, one of my teachers before told me that let's just say I had the potential. So what I did was I studied again. So I took up other courses. I took up a master's degree in English. So since then, I kept on practicing. Okay, so it's very important that if you really want to get, if your goal is really to achieve a certain band score, then you really have to practice. Okay, don't stop with yes or no, or with simply uh, with let's say only 500 words in your bank. You need to have about 1,000 or even more, 20,000 words in your word bank. Then take a long-term approach. Okay, so don't be in a hurry. Practice tests, yes, they're very helpful, but you again, what is important is that you know the different strategies on how to answer certain questions or certain task types. And then anything you do in English will help you to improve your language skills. Okay. So whether you listen to a song, you have a conversation, you imitate how people talk, that will also help you improve your language skills and push yourself every day and everywhere to speak in English. All right. So next step. So I leave this here. If you want, you can take a screenshot of the different websites. Um, Unfortunately, the person in charge to discuss the value added services, she's still on her way home. So I'm going to try to answer the questions. Okay. So here, IDP, they conduct tests in different test venues. So from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So here are the test sites. Currently, there are CD IELTS being conducted in Manila, Cebu, and Baguio. So if you want to take the test uh, computer delivered, then you can inquire in the office of Manila, Cebu. And I'm not sure if there's an office in Baguio, but Manila and Cebu, that's for sure. And then some of the value added services. So this is true. You get your results within 3 to 5 days. So if you wish to get it sooner, then you can take the computer delivered IELTS test. Delivery of the test is the only thing that differs between paper based and computer delivered test. Paper based, you have pen and paper, and then computer delivered test, you're using a computer, but the format of the test is the same. Okay. And then you can also take IELTS for UKVI on a computer. So you just have to book your CD IELTS for UKVI with IDP. So if you have questions about it, just please email IDP about it, or you can call them. And then I believe this is exclusive for IDP IELTS test takers, right? So I believe for test takers in Luzon and Cebu, they provide you with the best test experience because they provide wireless headphones for the listening test. So you are able to adjust the volume, and then there's clarity and isolation. You won't be distracted, okay, with the ambient noise or background noise. So you can um yeah, you can take the listening test with IDP with um, headphones. Next, you can prepare for your IELTS test also in the comfort of your home. So I'm not sure when it is scheduled, the webinar session, but there are webinar sessions. And also, I believe they provide you with free access to online preparation tools from Macquarie University. So if you register, I believe that you will be given a link, okay, and it's for free. So take advantage of it. Another would be is that they offer you getting your IELTS score or your IELTS results via SMS. This is only with IDP, but also, of course, with your permission. But um, this is not something that you can submit already. You still need to wait for your TRF or your test report form. And then IDP IELTS Premium Services. The IDP IELTS or IELTS IDP, they offer you writing enhanced. I believe that you can get a personalized feedback on your writing task or your sample writing task, so that way you know which parts you need to improve on. So this is only for 1,500. You can just email them about it. So I'll leave the email, the screen here. All right. So I'll give you maybe 1 minute. So try to take note of the different email addresses. All right. All right. So I guess that's about it. So let's start with questions. Um, Miss Gladys,
Yes. Miss Kath, hello.
hi.
Someone asked from Facebook from Wendell Vilches
Hmm.
Fernandez. I don't know if I pronounced her name correctly. Okay, so hi ma'am, I would like to ask if sorry. Hi ma'am, I would like to ask if where do you conduct IELTS exam in Iloilo?
I believe, okay, I'm not sure exactly, but I believe the last time they conducted the IELTS test in Iloilo, it was in Seda Hotel.
Hmm?
Um, it changes. It depends because right now I believe it's difficult to find an events place because of the different, IATF guidelines. So I do not know exactly where, but they do conduct their tests in Iloilo. So if you have a question about the exact location, it's better that you email them.
Any more questions, guys? Come
Don't be
on, don't be
shy.
shy.
I
It's your
don't
time to
bite.
shine. Well, Miss Kat is here.
I don't bite. Don't worry.
Yes.
But you know, Miss Gladys, even in my class, my students, they don't really ask questions. They just stay silent.
And then they're going to ask their classmates
Yes, and
after.
then that's true. And then they submit the wrong homework or they submit the wrong task types. Yeah, but yeah.
True. That's why
So
it's their chance to ask
yeah,
now to
yeah.
clarify if they have something in their mind that they need to be
Mhm.
uh, asked. Come on, guys. Don't be shy. This is your future. Oh, there's a question from Rachel Kiel. Hi,
Mm.
ma'am. Is there CBT in Davao?
I believe there will be one very soon. I believe. The last time I had a chat with an IELTS staff, I think they're already setting up a CD IELTS venue in Davao. So I just don't know when that's going to start. So it's best that you can ask them. It's best that you ask them about it, but I'm sure there will be one. Because the last time like I said, the last time I talked with them, they were already starting to set up a venue for that in Davao. Yeah. So
Hopefully
if
in Pampanga as well.
I think most people who take their test computer delivered are those with penmanship issues.
Yes.
Yes.
And if they want to have their results within one
Uh,
week,
Yes,
so because of their visa screen.
I see. I see. That's true.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
The questions, guys, about the exam itself. Come on.
So if you're wondering if if an examiner would be
Would bite
angry if
you.
you would bite you, I'm sure they don't. I'm sure they won't bite you. They're not zombies. Okay, I'm sure they're just regular people.
Mhm.
Okay. One of the questions I had to answer a few years back is that are Filipino examiners more, let's just say, are they more strict? That's not true. They follow the same band descriptors. The band descriptors, it's like a Bible for them. So if they don't use that when they're grading,
Mhm.
they will be the one who's going to be penalized. So
Ah.
yeah, I believe that they follow they grade you based on the band descriptor. So it's not about whether they're Filipino, whether they have blonde blue eyes. No, it has not. They went through the same training, so you don't have to worry about that. Because I think that's one of the myths
Yeah.
that
Actually, until now, Miss Kath,
mm,
most of the examinees
yeah,
believe that having this fear of having a Filipino examiner,
that's not
they
true.
think that they might have a lower band score.
No, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. I'm already telling you that's not true because I know that they are being monitored. So if let's say they become too strict, or let's say uh, I'm thinking of a simpler word for it. They cannot be too pedantic about something. They cannot nitpick. Okay, they
Mm.
cannot nitpick. So as long as you're talking, as long as you're answering the question, as long as you're providing them good words, and then the grammar lapses do not impede communication, you can still get a 7 from a Filipino examiner because they follow the same band descriptors.
Mm. So it's really, they are really following the book
Yes,
of band descriptors.
yes,
Oh,
yes.
there's a follow-up question, Miss Kath from Rachel Kiel. So,
Mm.
thank you, ma'am. Follow-up question. How would the speaking exam be conducted? Face-to-face or via video call?
I think it depends on the location. There are some locations where the internet is not really that good.
Mm.
So in that area, they conduct face to face. But I believe in Manila and even in Cebu, even Davao, Iloilo, they conduct VCS or virtual um, speaking exams.
So there's a question from Collins Deladem. Okay. Hi, please, how do I handle my anxiety during the text period?
The
I
what? Or what
I
period?
think what he or she is trying to ask here is about the writing period. Text.
Uh,
Yes. Hi, please, how do I handle any anxiety during the text period? I think this is writing,
I see.
right?
Okay.
Or
I think anxiety is normal. Being anxious, that's very normal, especially because you are anxious because you do not know what you are, let's say, looking at. Okay. Probably there is unfamiliarity with the situation, then you become anxious. That's why I was telling you a while ago that you have to practice, let's say, for example, in listening tests, for you to prepare for that, listen to a recording once only, because that's the only way, that's how the actual test is. So if you keep on listening to the same file over and over again, then you are not preparing for the exam. Okay, let's say for writing, for you to become less anxious, make sure that you know how to dissect the prompt, read the prompt carefully, because that's the problem with most people. This is about education, but they forgot to read the other words. Okay. So what happens is that yes, you provided, you're able to write an essay, but it's a question of relevance and appropriacy. So it's all about focusing, okay, on the task at hand and not being distracted. So if you're worried, if you're already thinking, oh, I won't be able to do this, oh, then definitely. It's always about positive thinking, okay? Um, for example, with speaking, you have to remove any biases or whatever, let's say, um, I don't want to use the word discrimination, but I think that is what's happening sometimes. That the moment they see their examiner, oh, my examiner is Pinoy, my examiner is Pinay, I'm going to fail. Don't have that kind of mindset. Remember, I will repeat, they're trained in the same way, they follow the same descriptors. So you don't have to worry about that. And for example, in just a tip before an exam, do not overstudy. I think that is what's happening because you're always studying and studying. So before the exam, do something nice, relax, breathe, so that the next day you're fresh. Okay? Because even if you overstudy, you do not know what you're going to face that day. So you have to have a clear mind during that day. So, for example, when I'm about to take an exam, like in a few days, I will be taking my own exam, not Ielts. It's about a teacher's training. Um, yeah, usually what I do is I just sleep or do something nice, eat something nice so that during that day I'm not nervous. Maybe if I'm nervous, maybe just a little bit. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. There's a question from Zoom. So Maria Carla Visperas. Hi, Ma'am Kath. How about Baguio? Is it face to face?
I believe it's VCS in Baguio.
Hmm.
I believe.
Okay. And then,
I think until everything is normal, I don't think they would conduct face-to-face exams. Yeah.
uh, and from Rizaldi Bulatao, can we answer in all caps in all three subtests? Thank you.
I believe that, yeah, you can. You're not being graded whether you can use uh, small caps or all caps. As long as you're answering the question, that is the most important thing. Even in writing, you can use all caps. What's important in writing is that you show the paragraphs, there's proper paragraphing. That's very important. It's not about whether you know how to capitalize. No, you're not being graded for that.
Two more questions from Facebook. From Isaiah Cuenca. What's the difference between band 6.5 and 7.0 in speaking?
Oh, 6.5 and 7. Okay. Um, point 0.5, you get a point 0.5, let's say, probably because let's say is probably maybe or let's just say let's make a scenario. You get a 6.5, let's say they ask you a question, but your answer is not so clear. You kept on talking, you spoke in length. It's just that there's a little bit of this fluency happening. Then you get a 6, let's say, for fluency and coherence. You can get a 7, let's say, for vocabulary. That's possible too. Then you get 7 for, let's say, sentence structure for grammar. That's possible. Even if you have lapses, as long as it doesn't impede communication, you can still get a 7. Then maybe you got, let's say, a 6 in pronunciation. Then that is why you got a 6.5. Okay. Actually, the line between a 6 and a 7, it's a very thin line. It's hard to explain how you get a point 0.5. You only get, let's say, a point 0.5 because probably one part of the criterion was a lot lower than the other. That's how you get a point 0.5. For you get a good, let me get a public version. I have a public version here. For you to get, let's say, a 7 in speaking, it says here in the public version that you speak at length without noticeable effort or loss of coherence. May demonstrate language related hesitation at times or some repetition or self correction. Uses a range of connectives and discourse markers with some flexibility. So here, you get a 7 for FC if you're talking without hesitation, meaning to say you know what you're saying. You know exactly what word to use, when to use that word, and you are developing the idea. You're not just sitting there and then looking around. That's a 7. It's also important that when you deliver an answer, it's connected to the topic. Let's say, for example, they ask you about, what's a good question? Let's say they ask you whether uh, students, whether they ask you whether everyone should learn how to play a musical instrument, but your answer maybe is, oh, yes. And then your examiner would ask you why. Then your answer again is, because it's beneficial to them. That's a very short answer. You won't be able to get a 7 with that kind of answer. You have to explain. Yes, I agree that most students should learn how to play a musical instrument because of the benefits. One benefit or one advantage is that it helps in their mental development. Another would be is that it makes them uh, a well-rounded person. Sometimes also when they know how to play a musical instrument, it has therapeutic, sorry, therapeutic effects, okay, on them. So you really have to give a well-developed answer for you to get a 7. So you only get a point 0.5 probably because of pronunciation, or maybe the FC was not really clear, or the fluency, or your answer for that is not clear. Yeah. Sorry. I hope I gave a clear, because it's very hard to really tell exactly why you got a 6.5. Yeah.
Okay. From Joe M. Villafuerte, how to improve fluency in speaking?
First, listen to the question. I think this is something Filipino, it's part of our culture. Example, if you ask a Filipino, kumain ka na ba? Ang sagot, mamaya na. Then in terms of fluency, it's not connected, right? So if someone asks you, have you eaten? Oh, yes, I have. Just a while ago. You don't answer, maybe later. So in terms of connection of ideas, there's a problem. So you really have to listen carefully to the question of your examiner so that you know what to give, what to answer, what to share. Because I think most Filipinos, even I sometimes, I'm guilty of that, especially when there's so many things in my mind. Like I was talking with Miss Gladys how I'm beyond workaholic. So sometimes when there are questions and my mind is not focused, yes, I get distracted and I'm not able to give sometimes the right or the specific answer. So you really have to listen carefully for you to get a good FC. So it's not, FC is not about vocabulary. FC is about whether you gave the right answer. Like you're on point. You hit the target. You hit the mark. You get an 8 if it's a developed answer. You get a 9 if you are already, uh, yeah, you sound like a native speaker already. If that, for you to get a 9 for fluency. Yeah.
Okay. For the last question, Ms. Kat, from Daffodil Hain Villa, how about shortcut words in writing, ma'am? I think what he or she is trying to ask is about contractions.
Oh, that's fine. That's
Mm.
fine. But remember, you're trying to be 250 words, right?
Mm-mm.
That's one trick. Instead of saying, uh,
I would have.
I would have, right? I would have, that's a 3. But if you only wrote, I would have, right? The contraction of
Two.
would have, that's only two. That's a trick. So why use contractions? But seriously speaking, in academic writing, contractions are not allowed. But in IELTS writing, they allow it. But like I said, if you are trying to meet 250 words, do not use contractions. But please, when you are, let's say, writing dates, do not spell out the date. Like today is 26. Do not spell out 26. November, spell out 26, 2021. I don't
Just
think
to
you will be
have
able
lots of
to.
words.
Yes. To be honest, I think maloko ang mga Pilipino when they're trying to write,
Mm-mm.
right? Hmm. Because believe it or not, even in my class, I train my students to give me, let's say, 4,000 words, for example, for a
For an
certain
essay.
paper, because it's a term paper. So
Okay. Okay.
if you're trying to,
I'm not going
let's
to sleep if I'm your student, Miss Kath.
don't worry. I give grades with a smiling, so at least it's not. Yeah. So anyway, don't worry. I'm not your teacher, so
Yeah.
I'm not gonna
Good
terrorize you.
thing. Good thing.
I'm not your teacher, so I'm not gonna terrorize you.
Or else, Miss Cat, I'll drop my class if
But
I'm
you
going
don't
to
have a
meet that
choice. I'm the only
4,000.
one teaching the class, the
OMG.
course. Yeah, but anyway, yeah. So yeah. Anyway, so are there other questions?
I think that's it from Daffodil.
Hmm.
So, any more questions, guys, before we call it a night? One, five, four. Okay, so Miss Kath, on behalf
Yes.
of IFNG administrators, Mr. M and Sir Jeff, and me, we would like to thank IDP Philippines for accepting our invite to have this series of webinar. So hopefully in the future we have another set of seminars
Yeah.
with you. So
Thank
thank
you
you very
also.
much, Miss Kathleen.
Thank you
Thank you,
also.
everyone.
Have a good evening, Miss
Good
Gladys, and
night.
everyone. Good
See you
night.
around, Miss
Bye.
Kath. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.